Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the final webinar of our Rejuvenate series, generously sponsored by our affinity partner, TD. My name is Jessica Lounsbury, and on behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement, I'd like to thank you for joining us. Before I get to introducing our guest speaker this evening, I would like to take this time to recognize that McMaster's campus is currently on the traditional territories shared between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Nations, which was acknowledged in the dish with one spoon wampum belt. That wampum uses the symbolism of a dish to represent the territory and one spoon to represent that the people are to share the resources of the land and only take what they need. We start our webinars with this land acknowledgement because it's important to acknowledge the original inhabitants of this land and the history that they share with this land as a step towards reconciliation. Throughout this presentation this evening, if you have a question for our speaker, please type it in the Ask a Question area on your screen. We will have some time at the end of the formal presentation to answer a few questions. And now I would like to introduce Jonathan Scholtens from Nature at McMaster, who helped arrange this evening's talk, and to introduce our guest speaker, Caleb Scholtens, a lifelong birder and naturalist from the Hamilton area. So over to you, Jonathan.
All right, so hello everyone. I'm Jonathan Scholtens, and I work as a natural lands coordinator at Nature at McMaster. We're a university organization under McMaster Outdoors and Recreation with a focus on natural lands management, environmental outreach and education, and research. We're happy to be collaborating with the McMaster Alumni Office to facilitate this event. Now I'd like to introduce Caleb Scholtens. As mentioned, Caleb is a lifelong birder and naturalist from the Hamilton area, with years of experience finding and identifying birds by both sight and sound in Hamilton and beyond. He works as a consulting ecologist, conducting surveys of birds and other wildlife for environmental assessments across Ontario. With that, I'll let Caleb take over and introduce you to the wonderful world of birding.
Right. Hello. So first I'll just say a bit more about me. So as Jonathan said, I'm a consulting ecologist, and so that means that I do wildlife surveys for environmental impact assessments for development projects, which can mean a lot of different things. So today it meant standing along a rail line with a bunch of construction workers, making sure that they're not going to be digging in tree roots and bird nests. But sometimes it means doing bird surveys out in the boreal forest surrounded by black flies, like in this image here. Or sometimes it'll mean doing caribou surveys in helicopter or all sorts of other things. And yeah, I've been birding and interested in nature in all kinds of different ways, mostly in the Hamilton area where I grew up. But that's enough about me. We're here to talk about birds, and I'd much rather talk about them as well. So why birds? Obviously, I've invested a lot of time in my life into birds, and you're investing at least an hour here, but I'd like to convince you to spend at least a bit more than that. So the first thing is birds are very beautiful. I mean, just look at all the different varieties here. They have a very simple form. It's just like two legs, two wings, got a bill, tail, but within that form, there's so much variety, like 10,000 different kinds, just within that simple form. And I think that's really beautiful. Watching birds is also a very peaceful activity. You know, it's pretty quiet. Yeah. It's just like you're going outside, and also birding is pretty accessible. You know, you can just you can see birds in your backyard. You can see birds at the park. You go to Bayfront and see them. There's pigeons downtown. Another nice thing about birds is there's sort of a medium amount of diversity. There's about 200 common species of birds in Ontario, which is a great amount where you can sort of ease into them, find some common ones in your backyard, and then explore a bit more and see more kinds, and spread out. Like if you travel a bit, you'll grow on the kinds you learn close to home. And so it's pretty reasonable compared to, let's say, like mammals. If you spend a whole day, like a whole year in a park nearby, you'll see maybe 5 or 10 species of mammals like squirrels, rabbits, deer. Whereas with birds, you might see like 50 or 100 species. But if you try to get into like plants or insects, there might be hundreds or thousands, which is pretty overwhelming. So it's in that way, it's also a gradual learning curve, which is really nice for getting into. Final thing, which is really appealing to me as a more introverted person, is you can go on your own. It's not like bowling or team sports where you kind of need to go with someone else. It's a nice, peaceful activity to do on your own. But you can also include friends. You can go for a walk with a friend and look for birds at the same time, and that works pretty well. Although if you're walking with me, you might be like talking about some life event or some deep subject, and I'll of a sudden be like, hold that thought, it's a weird duck. And so it's hard for me to respect someone if you can't appreciate a weird duck, and my friends know that about me too, so it all works out. So how do you find birds? Well, it's pretty easy. First, go outside, then look around. Hopefully you'll see one. It's not too hard. Probably at least a pigeon flying over. And listen as well. A lot of birds are small. They might be high in the trees. And if you feel like you found all the birds where you are, try somewhere else. Walk around the block. Maybe drive somewhere nearby. There will be more birds. So it's nice and easy. When you do find birds, respect their presence. They're not bothering you. You don't need to bother them. And then I'll move on to discussing some useful equipment. So the famous, probably the most popular piece of equipment that everyone kind of knows about is binoculars. So I'll just talk a bit about how they work and what you want to think about if you're choosing binoculars. So the first thing is when you look at binoculars, they'll have these two numbers on them. The first one is the magnification. So let's say like 8 times, 10 times, 12 times. And that's the amount that the view is bigger than what you see with just your eyes. So it was like 8 times it will kind of be a bigger view, 10 times will be narrower and more zoomed in. 12 times is really zoomed in. And then the second number, like 35, 42, 50, is the diameter of the piece of glass at the end of the binoculars. And the larger it is, the more light it lets in, which is really nice if you're looking for birds in the evening or early in the morning when they're often most active. The thing is, if there's a bigger piece of glass, then the end of the binoculars is heavier, which means it's harder to hold it up. And also, the more zoom you have, like if it's 12 times, you're really zoomed in. And so any shakiness caused by trying to hold up a heavy piece of glass is going to be magnified. So a 12 times 50 binoculars is going to have a really big piece of glass at the end, really zoomed in, going to be really shaky. You probably want to stabilize that on a table, and it kind of works better for like looking at the moon or something. Usually for birding, we're going to use 8 times 35 or 10 times 42. Then I just listed some brands there that are pretty popular. Vortex has a really nice lifetime warranty and great customer service. The other ones are all great as well. One thing is that you are paying for expensive piece of glass. You want it to work really well. You want it to be sealed and waterproof, etc. So usually you do want to spend at least $150. So it is a bit of a price commitment, but it helps you see birds so much better. And I just included a little diagram on the bottom that shows a bit how they work. If you just had the piece of glass at the end, like a magnifying glass, but for looking at things far away, it would actually switch the image upside down and backwards. So the light has to bounce around a little bit inside the binoculars to make sure that you're seeing it right side up. Another thing that you can use to find birds is bird feeders. A lot of people have these. And they work really well for bringing birds to you, but they do only attract a limited amount of birds. So like about, I think I've heard 95% of land bird species mainly eat insects. And even a lot of the birds that will come to your bird feeder, like chickadees or cardinals, they'll eat seeds as adults, but the young, when they're growing fast, they need insects, they need that protein to grow quickly. And so you are feeding the birds, but they're going to need like caterpillars and other things as well. And a lot of birds won't touch seeds. And so you just won't see them at a bird feeder. So if you want to get a broader diversity of birds, then you want plants that support the caterpillars, etc., that live in your area. A lot of birds have preferences on the insects they feed on, and then a lot of insects also have preferences on the plants they feed on. Think of like monarch caterpillars, sorry, only eating milkweed. Most insects have preferences like that. So if you plant a tree that's from around here, all the insects from around here are going to know how to feed on it. So something like a red oak or black cherry is going to support a lot of nice juicy caterpillars that the baby chickadees and the warblers and orioles are going to want to feed on. So there's a great link here from Bird Studies Canada with some advice on what plants to plant in your garden if you want to get more bird diversity. But then also some tips for bird feeders. Generally, sunflower seeds, black oil sunflower seeds, are going to attract the most diversity. You'll get chickadees, you'll get nuthatches, you'll get finches. But if you want to specifically attract little finches like goldfinches and siskins, the Niger seed is really popular with those guys. And another nice thing about Niger seed, you usually put it in those tube feeders with little holes that the Niger gets through. And a lot of the larger birds can't cling to the side of the tube feeder. So it avoids having to deal with like grackles and starlings that might crowd out the smaller birds. Similarly, suet is really attractive to like chickadees and woodpeckers, nuthatches, and often it will as well be in like a cage that those other larger birds won't be able to cling on to. If you're looking for orioles, which are nice bright orange birds, oranges and grape jelly are really popular for those, but it only works if they're already in your neighborhood. And because they mostly eat insects, like I mentioned, you're going to want to they're most likely to be in a neighborhood with a lot of tall native trees. I mentioned how to avoid some of the larger birds that some people don't want, like grackles and blackbirds, starlings. Another big one is going to be squirrels. And so you can see this set of feeders on the right is sort of maximally protective against squirrels. You've got the baffle on the pole in the bottom. So if they try to climb up the pole, they'll go inside the baffle and get stuck. They try to jump onto the baffle, it will shake back and forth and it's slippery, so they can't get up from there. They also can't jump down from a tree because there's those shields on the top. Usually you want to put it far enough away from a tree that they can't jump. All right, if you have it hanging, then you'll need those shields. Another great piece of equipment to have is your mobile phone, and particularly this Merlin Bird ID app. And this app is great. It's got sort of a field guide combined with automatic bird song identification. There's the Explore feature or the Identify feature. Just hold your phone up and it will listen to what's in your environment and tell you what birds it's hearing. And then you can click on them and try different recordings and see if it matches what you're hearing. So that's really helpful app for bird watching. But then there's also old-fashioned field guides. And these are really helpful if you have a picture of a bird or you're seeing one in front of you. And you just go through, find a similar group of birds and see which one fits, which one looks similar, which one is in your area. And these are the field guides I'd recommend. The Sibley Birds one is sort of the most popular with birders in general. It's very comprehensive, has lots of good information. You can get that one in just the Eastern North America edition, which is going to be a bit more overwhelming. It doesn't have like 1,000 different species for all of North America. But the National Geographic birds, the Peterson birds, also very good. Generally, birders have a preference for ones that have paintings of birds as opposed to photos, because a painting can show what the average of that species like. And a photo is going to always have a little bit of idiosyncrasies of that individual bird. There might be a tuft of feathers out of place, or the way that light and shadows fall might make it look slightly different than what you'd normally see. The Crosley guide on the right here sort of gets around that by having a collage of different photos, but that also makes it a thicker book. So these are sort of the best options. If you do have a field guide, I'd recommend you could get it, and when I'm going through different kinds of birds later, you could follow along, and that might be really helpful for learning them. There's also some great websites, which I'm going to be showing later in the presentation as well, that are really helpful for learning about birds and seeing what kinds of birds are in your area. So the Cornell Labs All About Birds is a great website for introducing yourselves to different kinds of birds, what birds are similar to each other. eBird is a great citizen science platform created also by the Cornell Lab. They produce a lot of great birding resources. And also iNaturalist. Both of these are citizen science platforms where a lot of people are submitting their observations, and then the platform collects those together to produce a lot of great big scale information that you can use. Finally, where should you go to find birds? Generally, you want to just try different habitats. Like if your neighborhood is by a forest, try open fields, try bodies of water. They'll each have different kinds of birds in them. And different types, looking for different types of vegetation. Like you go to one kind of forest, try a different kind of forest. eBird is really great for looking for places to go birding, because as I mentioned, there's the observations from all different people. And so I'll just show here, hopefully you can see on my screen, it's just loading. So on the Explore page on ebird.org, go to Explore Hotspots. And it might take a bit because it's loading the whole world. And this shows the amount of birds seen in different areas. So you see the tropics are super bright red because there's crazy amount of bird species. But Hamilton and Toronto are not too bad. If we zoom all the way in, here we can see the best locations are generally going to be against the water because it's got a mix of different habitats. And like you'll get ducks, you'll get different kinds of water birds, as well as whatever is living in the forest. So in Hamilton, here's a red spot for Coots Paradise, but then like specific spots in the RBG are gray as well. So here's general like South Shore, Coots Paradise, RBG, the Marsh Boardwalk, the Arboretum. Bayfront is actually a really nice place for birds, especially in the winter. You'll get a lot of different cool duck species. LaSalle Marina in Burlington is also excellent. Again, for ducks, you'll get maybe you could get up to like 20 different species of ducks in the islands and around the marina. And then you can, in the summer or spring, you can find some cool birds in the forest, in the park above it as well. There's the Grindstone Valley or Hendry Valley, or Cherry Hill Gate, as a lot of people know it. It's a great spot. There's a couple pairs of peregrine falcons that breed in Hamilton, so often you can see them here, as well as a lot of ducks. One thing that's helpful to note for finding birds is that when they're migrating, a lot of birds don't like to migrate over big bodies of water, or it will kind of make them hesitate. And so when birds are moving north, often a lot of small songbirds will migrate at night. They'll see Lake Ontario and they're like, I'm not going to cross that. And then they'll just go down right along the edge of the lake. And so little patches of forest, like Confederation Park or this little patch here, are really nice for seeing concentration of birds in the spring and the fall. Again, little patches of forest, like I think this is Paletta Park here or Shell Park up there, just right against like little patches of sort of islands between the lake and the city that concentrate the birds. So those are some of the best spots sort of in Hamilton. I don't spend as much time birding in the Toronto area if you're from there, but I know Tommy Thompson Park and Colonel Sam Smith are very popular. Those peninsulas out in the lake tend to concentrate lots of different species. Yeah, those are some great spots to go birding. I also put this map that shows different kinds of forests in Ontario. So you'll notice that at the bottom is the Carolinian forest. That's sort of the kind of forest in the Appalachian Mountains in the eastern US, broadleaf forests dominated by oaks and hickories. And you'll notice that north of Lake Ontario it switches to Great Lakes St. Lawrence, which is sort of like Maple Beach dominated forest. And then northern Ontario, far northern Ontario will be boreal, which is dominated by spruce. As I mentioned before, different birds prefer different insects and different insects prefer different trees. So if you travel between those different kinds of forests, you'll hear different birds. Like if you live in Hamilton, the birds in your local forest will be different birds than if you go up to the cottage in Muskoka or whatever. And so if you pay attention to what kind of ecozone you're in, you'll find different kinds of birds. So now I'm going to get into different categories of birds. And it's ordered approximately the way they're ordered in a field guide. Sort of just to come up with a standardized way of ordering field guides, they're sort of ordered by what's the most primitive bird, sort of approximately what's closest to dinosaurs, although that doesn't exactly work. And the fast ones will sort of be the most advanced ones. In practice, what it means is sort of like here, you start with large water birds and with little insect eating and seed eating birds. And so I have all the common birds put into 5 categories here. And basically, there's only a handful of birds in Ontario that won't fit into this system. And so I'm just going to go through each of these one by one, talk about the most common birds in each group. And once we're through that, you will have pretty good basic understanding of most of the birds of Ontario that will give you a framework to build on once if you go out and see a bird. Just switching to iNaturalist. So this will show you, this is iNaturalist filtered for birds in Ontario. And this will show you the most common birds in general. So I'm going to start with the waterfowl. And this is a group that contains ducks, geese, and swans. They're all in the same order, I believe the level is. Just wait for it to load all the different observations and synthesize them. Well, I'll start with one that everyone knows. So if I go over to All About Birds, very common waterfowl that most people know about is the mallard, which is the classic duck with green head on the male, gray body, curly black tail feathers. And the female is brown, stripy, with an orange bill. And they're pretty distinctive, very common. I forgot to test this before I started, but I'm going to try playing accordion. Classic quack sound. So yeah, All About Birds is great for going through common features of common birds. The male sounds a bit different. There, now it's loaded. So this is the most common waterfowl. So we see mallard right at the top. Everyone sees those all the time if you ever go to a body of water. Canada geese, also very common. I think everyone knows what those are like. We get two common species of swans in Ontario, the trumpeter swan and the mute swan. And the difference between them is pretty obvious from these photos. The black triangular bill on the trumpeter swan. And they do make quite a loud trumpeting sound. If you've ever been to, say, LaSalle Marina in the winters, there might be 100 of those because everywhere else is frozen. And you will be hearing that trumpeting sound. Mute swans, as the name suggests, tend to be much quieter. And they have this bright orange bill with a black knob on top. I won't go through all these other duck species, but we're very lucky in Hamilton to be a great spot for ducks. The west end of Lake Ontario is actually considered an important bird area because of the amount of ducks that we get here. Just going to turn off my video because it's lagging quite a bit and see if that helps. So next category here is loons and grebes. Loons here. There's only kind of one. We do get 3 species of loons in Ontario, but if you look at the numbers here, common loon is much more common. And I think most people know what they sound like and what they look like. Got that nice glossy black head, white necklace, and that haunting sound. Usually you'll see them when you go up north for cottage or camping. They do migrate through Lake Ontario, but in they tend to be in their winter plumage when they're in Hamilton, and so they look much duller. Without that nice glossy black head. Uh, Grebes are sort of similar to loons, but smaller. If you see something that looks like a loon, it's like a quarter of the size, is probably a grebe. Our next group is cormorants and herons. We only get really one species of cormorant in Hamilton or in Ontario, which is the double-crested cormorant. Very common. Every time I drive past Coots Paradise on the 403, I see a bunch of cormorants flying back and forth. Yeah, there's not a lot to say about them. They're very distinctive. They will dive underwater, and you'll see them out on trees afterwards drying their feathers. Most birds have an oil that they preen onto their feathers to prevent them from getting waterlogged. Cormorants don't have this to help them go underwater better. It helps, like, once their feathers are waterlogged, they can sink easier, which means it's easier for them to chase fish. But it also means that they can't fly as well after they've been underwater, which is why they'll dry their feathers after. Here's a heron species that we have in the area. A lot of these are pretty rare or hard to see. Like great blue heron is very common. People see it everywhere. The others you don't see very often. Great egret's about the same size as great blue heron, but it's much less common. If you go to Coots Paradise in the fall, you might see like a dozen great egrets spread all over feeding, but they'll be in the summer when they breed, they'll be in more obscure areas that are harder to see. Green heron is probably as common as great blue heron, but they're only the size of a crow. They're very secretive, and so it's pretty hard to find them. If you don't know what you're looking for, you'll just think it's a crow flying over, or just they'll be in the reeds, hard to see. Similar with black heron, night heron, although they're sometimes out in the open, and Hamilton is a fairly good spot to see them. They might be like out at Coots Paradise. Similar with the bitterns, as with green heron, they'll be in wetlands, in marshes in the area, but they're very camouflaged. They don't like to be seen, and so it's really hard to find them. Moving on to shorebirds and gulls and terns. Technically, they are all in the same group. So I'll actually cover gulls first. So there are a lot of different gull species in Ontario that you can see, which some people might be surprised to hear. There's a lot of different gull species, but by far the most common is ring-billed gull. I'll just bring it up on eBird here so we can get some better photos. So ring-billed gull, as its name suggests, has this black ring around the bill, which is one distinctive feature. This is going to be the gull that you see most often on parking lots or on beaches trying to steal your chips or French fries. This is really the default gull in Hamilton and most of Ontario. In addition to the black ring around the bill, it has the yellow legs here. The second most common species that we get is American herring gull. Which is a bit larger, and instead of a black ring around the bill, it will have this little red dot, especially in the breeding season, and it has pink legs instead of yellow legs. And then bring up shorebirds. And you'll see a couple of gulls mixed in here because they're related to each other. Wait for it to load again. Yeah, so the top ones are the gulls because people see those most often. But third one here, killdeer, very common in open areas, gravel parking lots, farmland. They have a very distinctive call that a lot of people will recognize. Sandpipers are a lot harder to find. They're pretty small. You might see them on a beach or on the edge of a stormwater pond. But there's a lot of different kinds of sandpipers, and they are lovely. But there's so many kinds. They're often very similar to each other, and they're really challenging to identify. The spotted sandpiper is probably the most common. You'll see it in stormwater ponds. But yeah, sandpipers are tricky. The terns are lovely though. Caspian tern is the biggest one, and common tern, very similar to each other. You'll probably see those if you go to Coots Paradise or Confederation Park flying along the beach. They're very beautiful. So that concludes the water birds, and I'll move on to our next big category, which is birds of prey. And the first bird of prey that I'll talk about is the turkey vulture, which is very distinctive, big black bird with the red head. They'll be flying around looking for roadkill. They've actually increased quite a bit in the past decade or so because of roadkill and possibly warming winters. But usually they would migrate south of Ontario in the winter, but a lot of them are staying just because it's still easy for them to find food in the winter. Before I talk about other categories of birds of prey, I'm just going to talk about sort of at a broad level how to identify the different categories. And usually when you see birds of prey, they'll be flying, and it's difficult to identify birds when they're way above you, flying, they're moving, and it helps to really get into the patterns that they have. So there's two different groups of hawks that we get, sort of the bird hawks and the mammal hawks. So you'll see them called bootios often, which is the genus name. And that's like the red-tailed hawk, which is definitely the most common hawk you'll see around generally. And it has the long, broad wings and a shorter tail. And they'll generally be soaring high above or sitting in a tree beside the highway waiting for voles or rabbits to go by. Whereas the accipiters or the bird hawks, such as sharp-shinned hawk or Cooper's hawk, they'll be sitting in a tree as an ambush predator waiting for birds to fly past, and then they'll be chasing birds through the trees. So they have short wings so that their wings are less likely to clip on branches, and then they have a long tail to act as a rudder so that they can turn back and forth through the trees easier. Another group that is going to be hunting birds is falcons. Their strategy is more to chase birds in open areas and just to fly really fast after them. And then if you see an eagle high overhead, it'll be similar to like a red-tailed hawk, but even more exaggerated, very long wings. And another thing to look out for is how flat the wings are held when you see them for distance. For example, the turkey vulture has a V in the way it holds its wings, whereas a bald eagle be flat. So some people talk about it as like just a plank. Whereas like a red-tailed hawk will be sort of in between, but turkey vulture in particular is very obvious. I'll go back here and search up hawks and eagles, so you can see which are the most common. So we'll see red-tailed hawk is by far the most commonly observed. And bald eagles are not actually super rare in Ontario. They've increased a lot since there's decline in sort of the 80s or earlier. And now along Coos Paradise, Lake Ontario, there's usually a few pairs around. And in particular in the winter, a lot will come down from Northern Ontario to feed on ducks and fish when the lakes up north freeze up. One thing about bring up bald eagle here. Bald eagles take 4 years to reach adulthood. And so they don't actually have their white head until they reach their 4th year. And so a lot of eagles you'll see will have this brown head. And so it's easy to think that they're golden eagles because golden eagles don't have a white head either. If we compare with similar species here. So the adult obviously has a white head, and so it's easy to tell an adult bald eagle apart from a golden eagle. But the young ones are very similar, actually. The main difference is the thickness of the bill. So it's tricky, but generally golden eagles are very, very rare in Ontario. It's very difficult to find them. So yeah, helpful to know that about eagles. I'll move to owls. Owls are, of course, very difficult to find. And so here's the most commonly seen species of owls in Ontario. Barred owls are actually difficult to find in Hamilton. They tend to be more further north. And so in Hamilton, we most commonly get screech owl and great horned owl, but they're very difficult to find. They're actually in most woodlots, but difficult to find unless you're listening out for them. So it is really helpful actually to learn their calls. But I'll keep moving on. So moving on from birds of prey to this next category, which is sort of a lump of land birds which aren't songbirds. It's sort of, yeah, miscellaneous category. They're not really closely related to each other or to anything else. And there's not many species in Ontario. I don't know what that peacock is doing there. They're not finding the wild here, but yeah, so the big two is wild turkey and ruffed grouse. Those are the two we'll see around Hamilton. The other ones are, they've either declined a lot or they're just not found in southern Ontario. We'll move on to grouse. And again, there's not very many species that we have. Mourning dove is going to be the most common. Rock pigeon is the second. And the others are very rare. But the sound of is very helpful for identifying them. Sure, that's a very distinctive call that you hear from mourning doves. Going to skip over to woodpeckers, since this is a common group that we'll see in our backyards or forests if we're going for a hike. And so sort of the top row here is the species that you'll see most commonly. Downy and hairy woodpecker are very similar to each other and difficult to identify. The difference is in their size. Hairy woodpecker is about a third larger, and they also have a longer bill proportional to the size of their head. Hairy woodpecker's bill is about half the length of its head, whereas downy woodpecker's bill is only a quarter of the length. They're both very common in forests and backyards coming to bird feeders. And so that's a common pair that is helpful to learn how to identify. Northern flickers are very distinctive. They have a loud laughing call, or they also do a loud clear sound that is very distinctive and common in edge habitats between forests and open areas because they like to go in open areas on the ground and feed on ants, actually. Pileated woodpeckers are largest species, about the size of a crow. Usually they'll need very large forests to live in, so they're more common further north. And red-bellied woodpecker is in more deciduous forests, so very more common in southwestern Ontario. Lots of them in the RBG, for example. And I'll move on from here to the songbirds. This is a huge category that includes a lot of birds that generally would be like a generic bird shape. A lot of them will sing, although some of them won't. For example, you wouldn't think of like crows and jays as songbirds, although they are technically part of that group. Speaking of which, I will bring up the most common ones there. They're part of the family called corvids. And there aren't a lot of those around, and some of these are pretty rare. Canada jay you'll only see if you go to Algonquin Park further north. They're very boreal. They like it when it's really cold. Blue jay, I think everyone is pretty familiar with these. They're loud, they're colorful. And I think we don't appreciate them enough, honestly. And some places like Europe, their default jay is just brown, and we need to get a nice flashy blue one. American crow is sort of the default corvid in a lot of places in Ontario. If you get further north, ravens would be more common, although they are increasing. The difference is ravens are larger. Ravens are about the size of a red-tailed hawk, and also they have a diamond-shaped tail, whereas crows sort of flat edge. They also sound quite different. Crow is the caw that everyone knows, whereas ravens make a variety of sounds, but it's usually more of a croak. I have a slide here which shows the crows and raven differences in the tail shape on the right. And then on the left, this is really helpful for identifying a lot of different birds if they're flying past you. This is the shape of their flight. For example, a chickadee or a woodpecker will be on the bottom. They have a up and down flight where they make a few flaps and go up and then take a break and close their wings and they'll fall down. Whereas something like a robin or blackbird will have a very straight flight where it's just flapping constantly. Um, Speaking of nuthatches and chickadees, chickadee is the black-capped chickadee. It has a basic chickadee sound. Sort of similar species that is very common in bird feeders is the white-breasted nuthatch. It has a shorter tail, longer bill. It doesn't have the black chin. A different species is red-breasted nuthatch. White-breasted is usually more in deciduous forest broadleaf, whereas red-breasted nuthatch tends to be more in coniferous habitat. Going to move from here to wrens. Common wren in Hamilton and further south, though not so much further north, is the Carolina wren. And has the white eye stripe, sort of an orangey belly, dark brown back. And its song is often described as a three-syllable tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. So if I play it on Eber here, hopefully it will have that song. This bird is from West Virginia, so it actually has sort of a different dialect from the one in Ontario, but it does sound very similar. I do want to, I'm not going to go into detail in the species here, but I want to point out the wood warblers, which are sort of the jewels of Eastern North American birds. There's a lot of different species, and they're all very beautiful. Hopefully they'll load here. Like the magnolia warbler, blackburnian warbler, perula here. They're really beautiful. Gonna move quickly over to actually I'll do the thrushes quickly. So we have a few species of thrushes. American robin is actually a type of thrush, and bluebirds as well. Thrushes all have very nice songs. The other species are pretty brown and dull, hard to identify apart from the song. Have the blackbirds and orioles. So orioles are actually in the blackbird family. So we have the red-winged blackbird. Common grackle is a type of blackbird as well. They don't have the greatest reputation. A lot of people think of them as bullies, and it's true they do tend to hog bird feeders, etc. But they do have a really nice blue head. Brown-headed cowbird is a common type of blackbird as well. And meadowlarks are in blackbird family as well, though common in pastures and rural areas. I'm going to move to, so northern cardinal is a common bird related to finches and sparrows. Most people would be very familiar with it. Male's bright red, female's brown. You can see it's really thick bill here for crushing seeds. Red-breasted grosbeak is a related species that doesn't visit bird feeders as often as though it will occasionally. They have a similar song to a robin. Most common finches that we get in Ontario are American goldfinch and house finch. House finch is sort of brown with a red head in the males. The females will be all brown. And then if we compare that to sparrows, sparrows tend to have more dark patterns. We have two different sort of families of sparrows in Ontario. House sparrow is one that's introduced from Europe. eBird has a handy feature on its range map, if it loads here, that shows the yellow is where they're introduced and the purple is where they're native. So you can see they've been introduced or have introduced themselves all across the entire world, sort of. So house sparrows have the black bib on the males and the chestnut on the back. Females are brown and striped like that. And then we have a lot of different native kinds of sparrows as well. They're fairly challenging to identify. The easiest one is dark-eyed jungle here. So that wraps up groups of birds that we have. And due to time, we're just going to skip past some of my other slides. And that wraps up my presentation. I sort of went a bit late. Hopefully we have a couple minutes for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Caleb. That was very informative. Lots of great resources too. So thank you for sharing those to all of our viewers. We will have those resources linked in a follow-up email that will be going out later tonight. So you will receive an email with a follow-up survey, but also those resources will be included there. So not to worry if you didn't get them jotted down, because there's some of them are look like they're quite handy. So we will share those with you as well. We do have a few questions, and we'll take some time here to answer a few. I know we're close to our time limit, but got a few to ask you. So Kristen is asking, what is a bird that you're always excited to see? And is there a specific Eastern bird that you have on your list that you would love to see this year?
Ooh, there are a lot of birds I'm very excited to see. One that I'd pick out is a Canada jay that I mentioned before. It's pretty bland and gray, but they just have a wonderful personality. If you're ever out in the boreal forest, they will probably find you and just come and look down and chatter at you for a few minutes before continuing on the way. In some places, people have fed them, and so there's like oversized chickadee that will come and take cheese or bread for your hand. It's really fun. Trying to think, there are a lot of rare birds in Ontario. I think I'd say scissor-tailed flycatcher is one that I've wanted to see for a while that I haven't seen yet. There was one in Toronto the past couple of days, but a hawk caught it today, so I
Oh
can't go
no.
see it anymore. Hopefully, usually one shows up once a year or so in the area.
Well, hopefully one will be back soon. Angela is asking, what tips do you have for finding owls? Angela is not located in the Hamilton area, but she is in Waterloo, and she said she
Okay.
can never seem to spot them. Do you wait for them to call or just look at the top of the trees in the evenings or early mornings?
Usually I do wait for them to call. Owls breed very early. They start singing in late February and they'll be nesting in mid-March or so. Recently, I found an owl on a golf course, sort of on the forest or the edge of it, a couple blocks from my house. And it was because I was out at sunset and the young have fledged already in beginning of May, and the young are making begging calls, which sound kind of like a wailing cat. So sort of like late winter, early spring, go out super early in the morning before sunset or sunrise, or a bit like half an hour after sunset, and you might hear the pairs singing to each other. Yeah, generally like spring, winter is when you'll hear them naturally at night.
Okay, that's great. Tony is asking, what is the best way to attract bluebirds in a wooded environment?
Hmm. Bluebirds like open areas. They nest in tree cavities, so they need to have some trees nearby, unless you have bird boxes, which are helpful to put up. So generally, it's hard to get them in a wooded environment, except for sometimes in the winter usually they fly south of Canada in the winter. In sheltered valleys, they might stay the winter in a forested area that's out of the wind. But usually they'll be in open areas where they can find some nest boxes or trees with cavities.
Okay, that's great. I know we had a talk once with the Nature at McMaster about the McMaster Forest, and I believe they have some of those boxes there as well. I'm not quite sure, but
Mm-hmm.
that the public can go to McMaster Forest as well. I'll make sure I share the link to Nature at McMaster as well with lots of resources about that too.
I can
Um,
confirm on the bluebirds at Nature at McMaster. I just saw some there this past Saturday.
oh, wonderful. That's great. Yeah, and that
Yeah, they have some
information,
nice
sorry, I was just
sorry,
going to
they
say
have
that
some nice
information
open
with
field
the,
areas. Go ahead.
go ahead, go ahead, Caleb.
They have some nice open field areas with like forests, and so it's nice mixed habitat that attracts bluebirds.
Yeah, that's great. Perfect. It looks like we've got two or three more questions here. Um, Suzanne is asking, what is the most unusual bird you have seen?
Most unusual. A couple years ago, I visited Kenya for a couple weeks, and one of the safari parks there, I saw a couple Somali ostriches. There's two different species of ostriches. Most people are familiar with the common ostrich, which the male is black with like pink legs, pink neck. The Somali ostrich has blue neck and legs. And
Hmm,
ostriches are just very strange on their own, but then blue-necked ostrich is weird.
that does sound strange. Okay, we've got two more questions here before we wrap things up. Rex is asking, do you have a recommendation for a free app to use to identify birds? A lot of them are paid, and with the overwhelming types of birds mentioned, he was just curious if there was a free app at all.
Yeah, some of them are paid, like the app version of the Sibley Field Guide is paid, but the Merlin app is free. So I definitely recommend that. You can download packs for different areas. So if you're traveling somewhere, you can download the birds for Australia or Kenya or whatever. But you can also download birds for like Eastern Canada or all of North America. And then you have all the information, photos, sounds, and a description of all the birds in your area.
Perfect. That's great. And I included that in the resource section too. That will be in that follow-up email. So you can note what app that is. I'm just going to check one more. We had one more question here. Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Okay. Final question for the evening before we wrap things up. Is there some way people can stay connected, or are there birding communities out there where they can continue to learn after this webinar?
Yes, let me just I had a slide for that I skipped.
Okay.
So here you go.
Yep.
So there's a couple birding clubs. There's a Hamilton Naturalist Club. They have regular events during the summer for birding and general nature stuff. There's also the Ontario Field Ornithologists, which is just a fancy way of saying Ontario Birding Club. And they also have events throughout the province regularly. And then I also mentioned rare bird alerts at the bottom. There are email groups and social media groups where people will advertise when they find rare birds. eBird also has that feature. If you look through the Explore page, there's alerts. And so if you can sign up to an email alert if rare birds are seen in your county or your city. So those are some different ways to find people.
That's great. I think I'll make sure I get those resources or those links to those birding clubs and resources added to our list as well. So when you do receive that email later tonight, we will make sure those are on there too. So in the essence of time, and I believe that was all the questions we've received. I'm just going to check one more time. Oh, Louise is asking if there's any local bird groups to join, but as you mentioned, those websites would probably be helpful for that, correct?
For sure.
Yeah, okay. So I'll share those in the resource links that you'll receive in the email, Louise. Yeah, so that's our presentation for the evening. I want to thank all our viewers out there for joining us, and I want to especially thank Wayne with Nature at McMaster, as well as Jonathan, who's joined us this evening from Nature at McMaster to help us set up this talk with Caleb. It was a very informative talk, lots of resources. I can't wait to get out there. I live near a wooded area, so I'm going to be pointing out birds everywhere now. So thank you so much for joining us. As I mentioned, you'll receive a follow-up email with a short survey where you can provide some feedback from tonight's talk, as well as watch a link to the recording, or if you want to share with your friends who might be interested, and those resources will be linked. So Caleb, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us tonight. And Jonathan, thank you for joining us as well. And I hope you all have a great evening and happy birding.